welcome to another episode of Dharma Talk. I'm here with Ayesha Lakhani. She is a relationship therapist as well as a play therapist. So you work with kids and adults.
Yes.
And we've talked before about play therapy. But today I wanted to use some of your expertise on relationships.
Oh my God, I'm going to start laughing. This is like, my expertise is my
but
failed relationships.
That's my expertise as well. That's how we know what to do.
Successes, actually, because you learn from them.
Yes, we learn from them. So we want to talk about interracial relationships because I don't know if it's a topic that gets talked about very much. And I'm in one. My husband is a different race and a different religion and a different culture. Like, any ways we can be different, we're different. As far as all the boxes we check, on forms. And so there are different challenges that come with that. You're about to get married.
I am.
And to a man who is not of your race, if we want to use the word race, maybe it's more culture.
Culture.
Yeah. So tell me what you think is challenging, not necessarily about your relationship, although if you want to throw that in, go ahead. But just...
I think the biggest challenge for me is growing up in a culture and in a world where it's somewhat normal for me and not recognizing and realizing the challenges someone else faces being a part of. So when we are like together doing family stuff, our families are so different, and he's just, I can see the overwhelm in him, and he just kind of is in observation mode, and he sees another side of me because he's not used to me being in that sort of chaotic, environment. And then we go to his family, and everybody is calm and quiet and just communicates with each other, and we're both very family oriented, but I realize that my family and my culture that I've grown up in is very normal to me, and then bringing someone from another family or another upbringing into my world is like, I can see how the impact it has, like how different it is for him. And then I forget, like, I'm just like, go with the flow, and then I'm like, this is all new to you, like you don't know how my family operates. So it's been interesting. I mean, luckily he's a laid-back person, so he just kind of blends in wherever he goes. But I can definitely recognize it and see it, when we're in those situations.
So how do you guys talk about the differences?
So he really just shares with me that he's never seen this side of me because he's never really been around my family and I until we got engaged. And so it's been interesting that I didn't realize that there was another side of me. And so for him, he's just trying to figure out, like, what is he supposed to do and where does he fit in and how things work. And I don't know what she's right doing. There. So I think that's what the difference is his family it's easy to just jump in and be with them and kind of blend. There's not a real, where does my place fit? And for him, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And so it does take some communication. I actually had a client a few weeks ago who was talking to me about, she was in an interracial marriage, and she was saying how she knew her husband as they were dating as one person, and when they got married, she said it was a complete culture shock because she didn't know, like, he didn't teach her or guide her into what she was going to be stepping into culturally and with his family, who was very, like, close-knit, close bonded, and she was somewhat estranged from her family, so she stepped into this world and was like, why is your mom ruling everything that's happening in our marriage, like in our lives? And so it was very interesting because she said, well, now looking back, I realized that was cultural, but it's not the world I came from. And I didn't know how to step into that and adjust. And for me, it came off as he was controlling. And so it was very interesting to hear that perspective, because for me, I'm like, nope, it's cultural. It's cultural. And I have that understanding. And she's like, well, I get that now. But in it, it just felt like fend for yourself. Like, this is how
Yes.
things work around
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And so that resonated with me, and how I need to be more aware of bringing my soon-to-be husband into my world and help him get more assimilated into normalizing
Yes. Yeah.
how we are.
And it's really awareness. You know, what's interesting, because we know this just from doing therapy, but the same logic applies in other areas. We're only seeing things from our lens, right? And our perspective, and our families and neighborhoods and all of that kind of stuff. And then you're mixing a friendship, relationship, all of that with someone who looks at the world through their lens, you know, and family and culture and all of that. And even though I think, I don't know if this is the right terminology or not, but the average American may think that there's not an American culture, when there is, but it maybe is different in the South than in the Northeast or on the West Coast, Northern California or Southern, you know, there are all these differences. But we don't maybe talk about American culture like it's a culture. The way we do about Latin culture, or, you know, Indian culture, or Chinese culture, you know?
Well, and I think it's because most people look at American culture as like almost like a baseline, right? And then every other culture is so defined in traditions and beliefs. And with American culture, it's so liberal. Most people are pretty liberal and not so defined in their traditions. But most other cultures have more defined traditions and experiences, and, you know, like the way you get married. There are certain customs and ceremonies and traditions that you follow. And American culture also has that. But for me, I guess the way I look at it is like it's a baseline. I don't know why I think that, but that's what comes to me when I think about that.
I wonder if you think it's a baseline because it's the dominant.
Maybe.
You know what I mean? Like, whatever the dominant culture is, and we happen to live in America, so it's a dominant culture.
And I think it's what I've been most exposed to, you know, outside of my own. It's what I've been exposed to the most, just being raised here and growing up here. And so it's very matter of fact and sort of normal, you know, to kind of be 1 foot in and 1 foot out, you know. It's like I feel very split, and having so I'm the first natural born American in my family. And so
I didn't know that.
So I've always had 1 foot in this American culture where I was grown and raised, and then, you know, this other South Asian culture in which I, you know, was raised by my family. So it's very interesting.
And your parents are fairly progressive for South Asian Muslim parents, you know? And what we mean by South Asian is anyone that's from India or Pakistan, basically, I think those two, maybe Bangladesh, you know, but South Asian culture. And your parents are still pretty progressive. And so how do they feel about you marrying outside of someone who's South Asian?
So it's bittersweet, right? Because I think there's an acceptance that's taken place that for me it was I needed to have a love marriage and choose my partner, and the person that stepped into my life is the person that has fulfilled that role for me. And he doesn't quite check all the boxes for mom and dad, and I think that's more just because of what's familiar to them. So this is them completely stepping outside of their box, but also having faith and trust in me that this is the right match for me. And I think that that's big, and I acknowledge that that's a huge thing for them to step outside of what they're familiar with to give me their blessing in this marriage.
So because, you know, you and I both work probably with a lot of first and second generation immigrant clients, I think what I've heard the most is what you just said, 1 foot in one world and 1 foot in the other world. Because you know, your parents came here as adults.
Mm.
So they were sort of fully formed in their cultural identity. And then you're born here and grow up here, you know, and
Culture shock for
culture
them.
shock, yeah, yeah. But I hear that from a lot of people is that, you know, at home, I'm the way my parents want me to be. And in the outside world, I'm out there being who I am, although a part of who I am.
Right. So I think it's a self-discovery process, right?
Yes.
Because it's also being able to find that balance. So for me, it's also knowing that my parents didn't have an understanding of what was happening in the world. Like they were still very sheltered in that exposure. And so as I grew up and developed my career, like one of the things I went to do, I'll never forget, is I went to go work at the Harris County Jail. And when I came and told my parents, and here I am thinking like, this is going to be an amazing experience. Like who gets to do this? And they were like freaked out. Like, why do you want to go work at the jail? Like it's so dangerous. And I was like, actually, it's the safest place because there's a police officer wherever you travel inside those walls. So it was interesting for me. It was perspective of like an amazing experience, and then being able to translate that to them. All they could think about was my safety, not necessarily the experience that I was getting and the excitement that I had. It was like, what is wrong with our child, and why does she want to go do this kind of work? But it's what drove me, and that's how I thrived. You know.
Well, look at the experience you got from that, and how any client you have now is able to benefit from that.
Absolutely. Well, and you know, jail, it doesn't exclude any culture or race, and so it is by far the best educational experience that you can get in compassion. You know, it is, and it's interesting. It's crazy to say that those experiences were unique for sure, but definitely, I mean, there wasn't a culture I didn't interact with. And it was also interesting as how different cultures survived in jail, you know. So it was definitely an interesting educational experience for me, for sure.
Yeah. I can see that. You know. Okay, so back to this interracial thing. What advice do you have for someone that's entering into an interracial, we'll say marriage, but it could be any kind of serious relationship?
So I think the biggest thing is trusting, for most families, is trusting that they can handle it, right? So it's the lack of, and anything that I've learned in my work, it's the lack of education that creates fear in people. And when you have an understanding and an education, that fear diminishes, right? Because, like you said earlier, is everybody's looking at it through their own lens. It's what I'm familiar with is what I'm going to gravitate towards. And if you put something completely unfamiliar to me without education, all it does is create more fear, and it makes me want to stick with what I know instead of stepping into trying to get comfortable and being uncomfortable. So when you provide the education behind it and understanding of why this works for you, or why you're doing the things that you're doing, or making those choices, or choosing this partner, it helps. It goes a long way. And it's not, I know for me, talking to my family, it was always so difficult because I felt like there was so much resistance, but I never pushed past that. It was just like, okay, there's resistance, I'm going to retreat because I must be doing something wrong. And now,
so you went to self-doubt.
I went to self-doubt, like I'm not making the right choice. And what I realized was it was just something they were unfamiliar with. And so in the long run, or in the short run, I may not have been making the right choice regardless, but it created more self-doubt, and it skewed the way I was looking at the picture, versus, no, this is actually not the right choice for me because of the characteristics of this person. Versus like, oh, they just don't understand. Like, it made me push harder for things that I knew weren't right for me. And so when you go in with a clear understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, and push for that, then I think that it helps sort of diminish that fear and stigma that's surrounded by this interracial joining.
Yeah.
I feel like if anyone looks at their families, I feel like everyone is a melting pot of cultures.
Absolutely.
So
yes. Yeah.
that's also why I struggle a little bit with, like, why is everybody like, oh, you're not the right color, or you're not the right shade, or you're not the right this. Like, to me, it's about, if you're open and it's accepting, like, you can be who you are, and I can be who I am, and we can create that together, or we can accept that this is where each other are and move forward. Like, to me, it's not that big of a deal. But I also understand how it's a big deal to certain people. But again, it's what's familiar to you, and experiencing what you've learned through your own lens.
Correct. Yeah. And you know, I know that language can play a part in it, because being able to speak freely is like such a we don't know how much we value it until we don't have it.
Right.
And I do understand that for some couples, being able to speak the same language, especially when the language is that of the other, in the sense, like, we live in America, so it's English, right? But if we lived in Mexico and one person knew Spanish and the other person only knew French, like, that would be a little bit of a problem, you know? So anyway, the other thing I wanted to, well, you already know this, but to share with anyone who's listening or watching, it's what I think couples, what people appreciate the most is an effort to get to know where they come from, or what their culture is like. And I don't even like to put all races in one specific culture or anything like that, but to come into the relationship curious. Because like you said, you didn't know if you were pushing against your parents or some others, you may have tried to make that work harder, not realizing that you're reacting to one thing and not the other, you know, and focusing on, my parents don't understand because it's a culture thing, when maybe, and they may not have known what they didn't like, because that's the easiest box, is the external.
Again,
you know.
it's that what you're not familiar with, you know, and so it's too scary. And if you can just kind of push back and make it go away, then okay, you know. But it's also being able to step into that and getting familiar with what's unfamiliar to you. My request was always, meet whoever's in my life and then tell me what's wrong with them. Like, help me see what I'm not able to see. But I mean, ultimately, you end up seeing what you need to see, regardless of what happens. So that has been a big learning lesson for me, you know, as well.
The other, I guess, message that, or one of the things that I learned was that some behaviors are not personal, they're cultural, you know, and other behaviors may be about that person. So I remember when my husband and I were dating, you know, I told him anytime my parents come, actually we were married by then, I said, anytime my parents come over, you need to stop what you're doing and greet them. And I tried to explain that, look, this is not a Rabia thing. This is a cultural thing where the elders, you always greet the elders. And I think in the U.S. we have gotten away from that kind of training. But I think, you know, 30, 40 years ago, that would have been the norm here as well, that any time someone enters your home, you know.
I also think it's, again, going back to, like, what's familiar with you, because, like, your husband, I know when his parents are around or his mom is around, it's, we're going to cater to her, you know? And so, again, it's what he's familiar with. The difficulty is translating that over to my family, even though we're not in a relationship together, or your family. Like, it's that piece too, where for us it's so easy because that's what's ingrained in us, that it's like, you're an elder, like, of course you go greet that person. I remember, like, with your mom, there was one time we were at an event and I saw your sister, and your mom was sitting right next to her, and she scolded me because I didn't say hi to her, but I didn't even see her. And
Oh,
she
who
did.
scolded you?
Your mom
Scolded you
for not greeting her.
Oh.
But I didn't see her. I saw
Mhm.
your sister, and
Mhm.
so I went to go say hi to your sister, and then she caught me, and I was like, I didn't even see you there,
Oh.
but she did, and
Yeah.
that's like the perfect example of like, you know better. Why are you not greeting me?
You're brown like me. You're supposed to say hi.
Yeah, and so I'll never forget that. But I do that, you know, even with my fiance's family. It's like the grandmother's the elder, and it's like, nope, you don't walk into a room and not go to her first.
Yeah.
And it's just part of who I am.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because, again, like, what's familiar to you, you know, you're going to take care of your family like no one else would, you know, but then you're right, it's hard to translate that.
It is. And I think maybe the real message is that whether or not you're in an interracial relationship, if even the clients that I have where both people are the same, like of the same background, they assume each other is similar in certain ways when they're not, you know, because in a way what my mom said to you, well, you should know better. Not always, you know.
Exactly.
But we do jump to that conclusion that, okay, well, you and I both are from here or have lived here, so we should have this understanding. And we don't. And so maybe it's curiosity.
It is curiosity because it always goes back to context, right? Like just because we're the same color and we come from the same culture, we were still raised differently, right? Again, it goes back to context of your parents raised you differently than my parents raised me, even though we come from the same place. And so there is no, well, you should know better, or this underlying expectation, because it's still different. In every situation, you always have to go back to context, you know, and there's always a reason for why people do the things that they do. It's because it's what they know. And it's just that simple. And that doesn't translate like across cultures, or it's just humans.
Well, and it's not personal, right?
It's not personal.
Most behavior is just the way we learn to move through the world.
Right.
And what we observe and experience growing up.
But that's where the curiosity comes from. If you come from a place of curiosity, like I always tell my clients, everything is about the approach. If you go in with this open, welcoming, curious approach, people are more likely to not be offended by you, and they certainly won't be defensive. So it's like, oh, you're curious, okay, like you can enter in, and it creates an environment of safety, which is what you want. So when you feel safe, then you're free to be you.
Yes, true.
So
wise words, Ayesha.
Very wise.
You know, I will sometimes still ask my sister-in-law, like, okay, I need to run something by you. You need to let me know, is this like a race thing? Or is it your family thing? Or is that just your brother's thing? You know, like, you're going to have to help me distinguish, because I can't Google everything, you know. And so she will sort of fill me in on that part of it. So
part of needing your tribe too, right? If you didn't have her to kind of bounce things off of, you'd kind of be lost.
So, okay, closing statements for today. The path, as you see for yourself, your journey so far, that's gotten you here in this, I think, perfect pairing with your fiance, soon-to-be husband.
So I think the biggest takeaway that I can look back and say, and it's actually a theme that's been coming up with my clients lately, is when you're in it, it feels like it's never going to end, and the struggles and the tribulations that you go through, it's at some point all the pieces will make sense as to why you are going through that struggle, and the path will ultimately become clear as to why you're supposed to be, why you end up where you end up, and why you had to go through all of that to get there. And when you're in it, it feels like it's never going to end, and you're always behind, and you're trying to get caught up and looking around and living in a comparison world. And if you trust your journey, it will come. It will unfold the way that it's supposed to and be right for you. and I can say that sitting here on the other end of
Yes.
all of those
Yeah.
struggles.
Yeah.
So I share that with my clients, and I say, I know that you don't believe me now, but I can promise you that when you get through the other side, we can sit here and have this conversation again.
Yes, and then we'll see. I mean, that's where they say, it's all hindsight is 20/20.
Right, of course.
If we're lucky, we get to look back and maybe take some of the lessons and share them with others, because you're right, it does get better.
It does get better, and I
Yeah.
think the biggest thing is if you can shift your mindset when you're having a struggle into gratitude for that struggle and the lesson that you're supposed to learn from it. Like, I always used to tell myself, it can only get better. It can only get better. And so if I kept telling myself that, it was like, okay, I'm just supposed to learn something from this struggling moment,
Yes.
and it will get better. And it did. I couldn't be in a better place in my life, and my personal life, and my career, with my family, with my soon-to-be extended family. All my pieces have come together, and I really couldn't ask for anything more.
Good. I'm happy for you. You deserve it.
Thank you.
So thanks, Ayesha. Where can people reach you? How can people reach you?
I am at infinitecounseling.com is my website, and at Infinite Counseling on Instagram. And Google me. Like, everybody Googles everybody. Just Google me and you'll find me.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having this. This is a conversation very close to my heart.
Yes.
I live it. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. We'll catch y'all next time. If you heard something today that resonated with you, please share in the comments or send us a review. If there's someone you know that could benefit or be impacted by our conversation, don't keep us a secret. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at I Am Dharma Talk. And our website is dharmawellness.org/I Am Dharma Talk. Until next time.